I had to use a different browser because for some reason my browser's not working. Um, so with free energy, we have a choice. At least when I study a surge, a transient, there's a choice because of this issue of how negative power factor comes into being. So first, let me go to the illustration to help me illustrate my point in advance of trying to explain it. We have here a free energy device, a lightning oscillator. Unrealistic in terms of buildability, but that doesn't mean Mother Nature doesn't do exactly this. Unlike us, when she creates her atmospheric circuits in preparation for a lightning storm, she is using air, moisture, the movement of air, all kinds of things that she can change in the blink of an eye. And that's why a tornado can arise so quickly and so suddenly. We try to predict it, but Mother Nature, it's like a forest fire. She can literally change your mind and have things go opposite or differently than what you thought she was going to do. Because she can dynamically change the arrangement of her circuit. Because she's got an electrical circuit there that's going on behind the tornado that's driving it. Now, here we're dealing with solid objects, and it may seem odd to have a gigafarad capacitor and a giga-ohm resistor adjacent to a pico-ohm resistor and a gigahenry transformer. It may seem very odd and strange, but this thing puts out a lot of energy. 2 discharges to ground simultaneously, periodically changing their frequency. This one looks pretty stable. So this one, it's negative, and this one is positive. It's sending energy into the ground, and this one is pulling energy out of the ground. So 2 different lightning strikes. One sending energy into the ground, one taking energy out of the ground. Meantime, there's the driving force in here that keeps it running. It doesn't stop, putting out spikes of 100 kiloamp spikes and 40 gigavolts, or 25, depending on which one you're looking at. Oh, actually, this spikes is only 12 amps, and this one is 100. And then now this is 3 megavolt spikes, and this is 24 gigavolt spikes. But anyway, I found in the course of my construction of this device several years ago that if I do not discharge the result of the surge, the oscillation dies, and the surge, I believe the surge dies as well. It's just that this thing is so well balanced between what it manifests, the energy it synthesizes, versus the energy it dissipates, that it's able to maintain an oscillatory condition continually and never stop. It never runs out of energy. It never blows up in your face. It keeps running. It keeps energy moving, because that's really all energy is. It's movement. One of the 5 qualities of prana is vyana, circulation. There it's changing direction. It's changing polarity. Vyana. And yet, we normally think it costs energy to move energy. But here, it's not costing me anything except the initial energy from this aerial to get it going with a snap switch, which is a tremendously small amount of energy by comparison to this thing running Talk about a perpetual motion machine. You do have to give it some energy in the beginning to get it going, but once you get it going, you can forget about it and leave it alone, and it'll keep running. Just like the movie Forbidden Planet. The machines, the energy machines, just kept running. And unlike that, though, the explanation was, well, the energy inside the planet that it's utilizing is such a long period of time, we don't even have to worry about it. Here, time is not even involved in that sense, but it's involved in a different sense, which I'm getting to. And it's very significant, because we keep thinking of energy as if it's a log of firewood that we burn it up and we use it and it's gone. but we have a return wire that goes back to the grid. We take energy, we give it back. Okay, so now I'm segueing into what I want to describe. When we deal with zero power factor energy, we're told it's useless, but it's not useless. It's useless for consumption purposes, but it's not useless because it energizes our coils. And then we're told, well, this energy that we're using to energize the coils, it may be useless in terms of spending it, and we don't really spend it. We can't spend it. All we can do is borrow it because we have to send it back to the grid when we turn off the motor and de-energize the coils. Well, let me let you in on a little secret. That's not exactly the way it works. Even though that's the way we keep bandying around telling each other that's the way it works, that's not the way it works. The way it works is, per cycle of time, we borrow it and we give it back during each half cycle. It's when the motor turns down, we stop that process. This is significant. This is very important you get this in mind, because now we're dealing with time. Per cycle of time. We borrow per half cycle, and we return what we borrowed the second half, minus any losses due to heat, whatever. But we cannot spend it. You know, if we energize the coil with zero power factor, we can't spend it. We can't. It's impossible. It's according to the laws of physics and electrodynamics. We cannot spend it. We can lose it, but we can't spend it. Due to inefficiencies. All right? But this is per unit time we do the borrowing process. It's not per on versus off of the machine. There's no such, it doesn't work that way. This is very important, okay? Got me so far? You keep up with me here. All right, trying to go slow, step by step here. But this is because I'm going to explain how free energy works, how you can get an infinite amount of energy out of a device such as this that's before your face. It's ridiculous how simple this is because we did not define how we use zero power factor correctly. So there are consequences to this new definition. There, it changed polarity again. See, it changes polarity once in a while. Okay. In my device, which is not this, but in my thematic device of a shorted motor, I have two parent waves. Because the waves, let me see if I can find the... Nope, that's not it. There. The waves are at odds with each other. They're 180 degrees out of phase. So if we zoom into this is the input. Okay? The blue is the voltage at 50,000, no, at 20,000. And the red you're going to see is a little higher frequency. It's at a little over 100,000 cycles per second. We zoom in. Nope, not yet. We zoom in, and here's our amperage. And it's more than two little waves. We've got about here around 10 or so. And so it's actually a little faster frequency on the amperage. Anyway, be that as it may. Oh, this is not a good example. Well, I have others. I'm sorry. I don't have a good example available. I'll just have to talk through my lecture without the example. So in my circuit, I create a condition of negative power factor, all right, in which the current and the voltage is out of phase by a whole half cycle. Now, what does that mean? It means I took two parent waves, because the daughter wave is a fiction. It's a mathematical fiction created by two actual parent waves. This is very important. Now, the two parent waves are zero power factor. One, the current is leading. The other, the current is lagging, but both by the same amount, 90 degrees. So it ends up when they create their child wave, she ends up with 180 degrees difference between her current and her voltage. But her two parents are real. Well, they're in the imaginary number, they're in the complex number field, but be that as it may, they actually exist, while the daughter does not. The daughter is merely the blend of the unity of the two parent waves. Just like a beat frequency doesn't really exist, except in our mind, because of the blending of the two different waves of different wavelength. Okay? Well, it's the same way with negative power factor in this example. I don't know about any other situations, but in my little device, I do not create negative power. I create zero power factor, but they're opposite in orientation. They blend to create the daughter, which is a fiction, but it's there. Nonetheless, it's the blend. It's the result of the two parents being blended. Now, by definition, our new definition of zero power factor is that we borrow it per half cycle and we return it, give it back the following half cycle of every cycle. Same way it works with the daughter. Because she's the product of her two parents. So we borrow her and we give her back each cycle. Now, what's a cycle? We're not running this thing on 60 cycles. It's true I run it on 20 cycles per second voltage, but you saw the current already went up by a factor of about 5 or 10, or I don't know. 5. It went up by a factor of about 5. So this thing raises frequency. That means it borrows and returns the zero power factor per unit of time more quickly. Now, if you have a barrel of water, if you want to appear to be wealthy to people, you don't want to spend the money, you just want to have it in your bank account. And you say, I want to borrow the money. Please give me $1 million so that I might show off to my friends how wealthy I am. I won't spend it. Trust me, don't even let me spend it. I just want it to sit there. And when I get done with it, I'll return it to you. Because let's say it's a timely loan. You're only allowed to borrow it for a certain duration, not forever. Well, what if I shorten that duration? And then I'm on good terms with you, so I keep coming back to you at the end of each term that I returned it to go fetch another $1 million and start the cycle all over again. In other words, renew it or start a whole new term, So I'm borrowing it and I'm sending it back, borrowing it and sending it back. Meanwhile, I'm wealthy. I got $1 million in the bank and I get to show off to all my friends. And you know what that does? It changes your social standing. They start to come to you for advice. What's the story? There's a song of Fiddler on the Roof. There's a song about that. If I were a wealthy man, people would come to me and seek my opinion, as good as if I were the rabbi, of the village. I would be sought after for my knowledge and wisdom, and all I'm doing is borrowing money, but I have to give it back. Now, if I return it, if I borrow and return in a quicker duration, in a shorter span of time, and thus do so more frequently, this becomes very interesting, because frequency is potential energy. But potential in what sense? The potential to make the choice to spend it. Now, the two parent waves, I don't get to spend them. There's zero power factor, but the daughter is negative power factor, and she can only do one thing. She has to give. She cannot spend. Yet this is a motor designed, theoretically, the whole point of a motor is to spend energy, not to become a generator. But it's generating, so to speak, in-house. It's not getting it from outside. It's got a little bit from outside, but all of the surge is developing in-house. So by definition, a negative power factor has to be shared. It has to be given away. It's not something you spend. And in a sense, you don't need to spend it because your parents are giving you an infinite amount of energy per se, because all you do is borrow it. It's like leasing a car without buying it, except you don't even have to pay for the lease. You just borrow the money to pay for the lease. And it is not exactly the same analogy, but if you get my drift, you get to have energy that you can't spend, but you get two parents of opposite orientation that you can't spend. And they blend to form a daughter which you can't spend, but you have to give her away. Now, the only technicality difference between her and the normal energy that we get from the power grid that we have to spend, the positive power factor, is a difference of direction. That's the only difference. So while we are taking energy from the grid to run our motors, we could just as easily be giving it. And that's what this, if I could find it, this circuit is all about. It's giving energy away. Now, it can't give it away too fast, because I figured this out. If you make this inductor too high, these are very set values here. Notice they're not the giga like everything else. A mere kilohenry on this inductor and a mere 250 ohms on this adjacent resistor, because in these days I didn't know about equivalent series resistance of coils and caps, so I always put my resistors adjacent to the coils and caps, not inside them. Here I have it separated by a spark gap. On either side I have a resistor and I have a capacitor. Be that as it may, these are set values. I once took these up to ridiculously high values and I killed the surge and the whole thing died. So you do have to operate within your limits. You know, the surge is only going to supply so much and no more. And if you try to overload your surge, you'll kill it. And then there goes your Aladdin's lamp of free energy. It's out the window and down the street and buried 6 feet underground. But if you stay within your limits of expenditure, you literally can't spend it. You have to give it away at a certain rate, but not too fast, because if you give it away too much, it's the same as spending it too much. See, it's just a question of direction. Negative power factor, you're giving it away. Positive power factor, somebody else is giving it to you. But it's still at a certain rate. If you take too much, or if you share too much, the bounty ceases, regardless of the direction of who's giving it to who. We already know what it is. It's just a question of, at this point of the argument, what direction it's taking, but also how much, how fast. Now, one of the odd things about, see, this is stable because it oscillates, but my circuit is not stable. It surges, but it is stable because of the spark gap and all of the balance of the other factors. Yes, this is another example of an oscillating circuit in which it's relatively stable. But the difference here is that it's not receiving energy to spend it, it's sharing energy to spend it in reverse. And so if you overload this, it'll die. How many times I find that happen? Or if you underload it, it explodes. And it loses its ability to regulate itself with self-regulated oscillations. So it's a very delicate balance, but I'm trying to confront you with the idea that free energy is really a question of perspective, as well as a redefinition of what it means to be a zero power factor. We don't borrow it while the device is on. We borrow it per cycle, and then we give it per half cycle, and then we give it back the second half cycle. And if the cycle should shorten, the frequency increase, we do that process more quickly. That means we're processing the same amount of energy in less time, which means that if we kept the time frame the same in terms of our perspective, while the frequency increases, what we would see is more energy, not less, because the frequency went up. The frequency of how often we borrow and how often we return. That gives us more opportunities per unit of time to make the choice to share the energy, to give it away. And we have to, because if we don't, the thing will blow up in our face. I can regulate this, but that's because it's self-loaded, is what it amounts to. So if you apply a load to it, then you have to have a computer chip figure out rebalancing act, because now it has to accommodate an exterior load up to a certain safe limit and still continue to do its thing, creating free energy. Because it's a question of borrowing and a question of speeding up the cycle of borrowing and returning. And also it's a question of blending two energies that we borrow, not just one. And they are opposite in character, such that they create energy that we have to give away, namely negative power factor. While the two energies that we borrow, we can't give them away, we can't spend them, We can't share them by themselves individually. All we can do is recycle them, borrow and return, borrow and return. But it's a fascinating piece. We don't think of time as a means of creating free energy. And it's really those three ingredients of time and a leading current versus a lagging current, 90 degrees in each case, those three factors we manipulate to create free energy. So long as we look at it the right way and have the correct definition. And also understand it's a very precarious balance of forces. If we should upset it, the whole thing either explodes or dies. Two extremes. And I think we overlook the explosions that happen on transmission lines. We harp too much on, oh, that guy, he thinks he can come up with a perpetual motion machine, forgetting that the opposite of an explosion, because see, a perpetual motion machine it does not exist. What exists are explosions, electrical explosions, and electrical deaths. And anything in between is a very precarious balance of self-regulatory oscillations, which could easily be thrown off balance and either explode, electrically explode, or electrically die. There's really two choices. Or the third one is a precarious balance to be able to maintain. But the two extremes, they're no trouble at all. And we have perfect examples. But we look at things too narrow. We only think of the death, an electrical death of the free energy advocate. Oh my God, of his idea. We never think of the explosion, which is just as relevant, just as probable. In fact, I think it's even a little more probable, but I don't know. In terms of choices, though, thematically speaking, it's just as probable, as is the death of free energy, is the explosion of free energy. And for us to hide our heads in the sand and say that explosions are not part of the equation is to misunderstand what free energy is. It's the explosive nature, it's the electrical nature of an explosion. See, that's the correct way to define free energy. It's the electrical definition of a bomb. So I am studying explosives, but not the chemistry. We always think, oh, the guy, some movie, the guy uses explosive. Well, I'm really good at using plastic explosives, TNT. Oh, I know all the types, But that's chemistry. It would be interesting to see if somebody came up with a movie theme and say, well, what about electrical explosions, huh? No, purely electrical. No chemistry involved whatsoever. Because then that leads, see, so we really don't understand. We're so brainwashed to think erroneously about a topic that we can't possibly accept anybody who dwells on it. But it's really quite simple. I just explained it in the most simplest way possible. And anybody, even a child can understand explosions. And a child can understand death. And yet, we talk about the sun exploding eventually, and then dying afterwards, as if it has to happen that way. Why can't it just die and skip the explosion part, Or maybe it's exploding even now as we speak, and we don't appreciate it, because those are controlled explosions, because it's actually running just like my little lightning oscillator was running there. That might be actually not a lightning oscillator. That might be the solar oscillator. It might be the way the sun runs on such a gargantuan scale, because it's constantly putting out energy. But if it should become imbalanced, then it would explode or die. It doesn't have to do one and then the other. It can do one or the other. It's ridiculous the way we look at things. It's unbelievable. So, I hope you've ignored the background noise coming in from outside. I have to have fresh air, sorry. And this discussion of free energy, in the simplest way possible, it's unbelievable. And time is a big part of it, When we pay our bill, time is involved. Oh, what duration is this bill for? 2 seconds or 2 months? It would make a bit of a difference, don't you think? If it was 2 seconds, well, gee, are you going to charge me again the same bill on the next 2 seconds later? My God, I'll be destitute in no time flat. So they're nice enough to charge us only once every 2 months, or so that we don't become in the poorhouse just because we want to light up our life. So it's what they can get away with. So they're using time as in terms of what they can get away with. Well, isn't that what I do? I'm getting away with stuff per unit of time. I mean, really, it's a game, but it's a game of ignorance between us. But the game of what you can get away with is really a personal best kind of thing. What can you do with electricity? Because nobody's going to do this for you because they won't be able to make any money off of it. My three most important supplements nobody can patent: cayenne pepper, potassium iodide, and silver ions of silver. Nobody can patent that, and yet they're the simplest ways for me to stay healthy. And salt. 4. Nobody can patent salt, you know. That's why Gandhi did his salt march, because the British were charging the Indian population for their use of their own salt, which is kind of ludicrous, but the British were making money left and right off of everybody and everything. And we do the same thing to the Hawaiians. We take their sugar cane away from them, process it over here in the mainland, and then sell it back to them. How ludicrous is that? Meanwhile, they're making their own honey. So the honey business in Hawaii is very lucrative. Why are they going to pay us for their own sugar, So there are a lot of these scams going on, and that's a scam. And the British charging the Indian population for their use of their own salt, that's a scam. But this free energy is not a scam. It simply is, if you understand how it works. Maybe there's some other way it works. I don't know, But in terms of what I've been studying for the last, few years now, it always comes down to the same thing. But it took me this long to figure out how to understand it and explain it. So it doesn't take much to explain it. But anyway, I hope I did my job and you get it. As my little interlude here between. Now I have to go back to work. All right.